I've been saying in interviews from the beginning of this year that regardless of who wins this year's US elections, that Europe needs to learn to stand on our own 2 feet, and that the United States, as a reliable security partner that we have known for many decades now, since the end of the Second World War, is in all likelihood lost. So for me, it's not a case of who will be the worst option for Ukraine, first and foremost, and for us in Europe and for the rest of the world. But it is very much a case of who is the least worst option. So let's have a look first at Donald Trump. And I'm afraid I am not as optimistic as many, including colleagues of mine whose opinion I trust, that what Donald Trump says and what he will actually do in power will be very, very different. What Donald Trump is saying at the moment he will do is exactly what he will do. When Donald Trump was in his first term in the Oval Office between 2016 and 2024, he was constrained to a great degree by the senior advisors in his team around him. He has learned that lesson and he has cleaned house. And if he does get a second term in the Oval Office, he will fill all the important positions with Trump loyalists. So for a moment, let's just have a look at what some of his former senior colleagues have to say about Donald Trump. John Kelly, who is his chief of staff, has said he has nothing but contempt for the American democratic institutions. Bill Barr, who is his Attorney General, has said he should be nowhere near the Oval Office. And Mark Esper, who is the Secretary of, one of his Secretaries of Defense, said he is unfit for office as he puts himself before country. Chris Christie, who was his the chairman of his transition team, says that he is wholly unfit in every way you can think of. And finally, another national security advisor, H.R. McMaster, has said has talked about Trump's anti-leadership and the absolute damage that could do to the United States. While John Bolton, who has warned us for some time now about Donald Trump, has said he cares only for retribution and himself. And it was the same John Bolton told us the story of how in the back of the limousine on the way to a NATO meeting, Trump was saying that at that very meeting he wanted to pull the United States out of NATO, something he has threatened to do many times. And it was only Bolton and other senior advisors around him at the time who persuaded him out of that course of action. As I said, Donald Trump, I believe, has learned the lessons from his first term. If he gets a second term, he will be surrounded by loyalists and yes men and yes women who will not put such brakes on him. So what should we expect if Donald Trump were to gain a second term in the White House? Well, I think he would almost certainly pull the rug out from under Ukraine. And I think that Donald Trump is in thrall to Vladimir Putin in ways that we can guess at and in ways that we probably don't understand fully. And there may well be compromise going back to as far as 2012 or even further involved in that. He will pull away from Ukraine. He may well pull the United States out of NATO, leaving Europe to stand on our own 2 feet. And I believe he will pivot towards the Middle East and China. And this strategically would be absolutely the wrong thing to do. The greatest immediate threat for our security in Europe and the globe is what's happening in Ukraine at the moment. We are in the foothills, and have no doubt about it, of World War III already. World War I and World War II began in Europe, and World War III has already begun in Europe. And it is only by fundamentally defeating Putin in Ukraine that can be stopped. The Ukrainians, since I started working with them in 2016, have been trying to tell the world that Putin will not stop in Ukraine in his desire to put the Russian Empire back together. So that's a Donald Trump, which I think would be very bad news and would leave huge challenges, not just for Ukraine, but for all of us in Europe. What would we make of a Kamala Harris presidency? Well, I'm afraid after the experience of the Biden presidency, which I've got to say has been ultimately disappointing on Ukraine, and no doubt with huge influence from National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, I have seen no reason to expect anything but more of the same from a Kamala Harris administration. It seems very, very clear that America has not wanted to defeat Russia, has been afraid of defeating Russia, has been afraid of the possible breakup of the Russian Federation, and seeks some sort of a mythical reset in relations with Russia, which, quite frankly, is not possible. So I don't have any great optimism for either a Trump or a Kamala Harris presidency, but I certainly think that Kamala Harris and a Democrat president in the White House will be by far the least worst option, and at least we could expect the level of support to Ukraine to continue, possibly at the same level. The problem with that support is it is and always has been enough to keep Ukraine in the game, but not to allow Ukraine to deliver the final knockout blow. It will be a very, very interesting few days.